The Greyhound's air brakes hissed like something dying as I stepped down onto cracked asphalt. Shell Station, Needles, California. The kind of place you pass through, not the kind you stop at unless your world's already gone to shit. $43 in my front pocket. Duffel bag slung over my shoulder with everything I owned. 3 pairs of jeans, some t-shirts and underwear that had seen better days. And Christ, the heat. 112 degrees according to the digital sign above the gas pumps. Felt like standing in front of an open oven. The kind of heat that makes you stupid, makes your thoughts move like syrup. I'd been riding buses for 11 days straight, sleeping in stations and truck stops, eating gas station burritos and stale donuts. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. Portland seemed like a different lifetime. The restaurant job I'd lost, the apartment I couldn't afford, Sarah telling me she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't watch me circle the drain. Smart woman. Should have listened to her warnings about the gambling. Should have done a lot of things different. But here I was. End of the line in more ways than one. The bus driver was already pulling my bag from the cargo hold. "This your stop?" he asked, squinting at me through aviator sunglasses. "Yeah." My voice came out rougher than I expected. Hadn't talked to anyone in 2 days. He nodded, handed me the bag, and climbed back aboard. The Greyhound rumbled to life and rolled away, leaving me standing alone in a puddle of diesel fumes and regret. The Shell Station was one of those old-style places that looked like it had been there since the 50s. Concrete block building, painted white, now gray with age and dust. A couple of truckers were filling up their rigs, not looking at much of anything. The kind of tired you get from too many miles and not enough sleep. I should have bought another ticket. Should have kept moving toward Los Angeles, toward something that might have resembled opportunity. But the money situation was getting desperate, and sleeping on buses was starting to mess with my head. Started hearing things that weren't there, seeing movement in my peripheral vision. Desperation makes you stupid. I know that now. The heat hit me like a physical thing as I walked away from the station. Dry heat that sucked the moisture right out of your lungs. My t-shirt was soaked through before I'd gone 50 yards. The duffel bag strap cut into my shoulder, and I kept switching it from side to side. Interstate 40 stretched out in both directions, shimmering in the heat like water. Nothing but scrub brush and rock formations that looked like they'd been dropped there by something that didn't give a damn about making the place pretty. The mountains in the distance wavered behind heat mirages. 2 miles. That's what the trucker back in Flagstaff had told me. 2 miles past the Shell Station, you'll see it, can't miss it. He'd laughed when he said it, but not in a good way. My boots kicked up dust with every step. Cheap work boots I'd bought at a thrift store in Oregon. The soles were wearing thin, and I could feel every pebble through them. Sweat ran down my back between my shoulder blades. My mouth tasted like copper and exhaustion. Should have kept moving. Every instinct I had left was screaming that at me. But $43 doesn't get you far, and I hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. The frontage road appeared like a mirage, cracked pavement leading off the highway toward nothing I could see. But the trucker had been right. You couldn't miss it. The Mojave rest stop diner squatted at the end of that road like something that had crawled there to die. Sun-bleached paint peeling off aluminum siding. Windows so thick with dust you couldn't see through them. The whole building listed slightly to one side like it was tired of standing upright. A gravel parking lot with maybe 6 spaces, most of them cracked and sprouting weeds. But there was a neon sign, pink letters spelling out open, flickering like a dying heartbeat, and underneath it, taped to the inside of the window, a handwritten sign that made me stop walking. Help wanted. Immediate housing provided. Immediate housing. Those words hit me like cold water. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes just staring. The smart thing would have been to keep walking. Everything about the place felt wrong, too isolated, too quiet. But desperation's got a way of drowning out common sense. The door was heavy glass with a crack running diagonal across it. No bell when I pushed it open, just the whisper of moving air and the hum of an air conditioning unit working overtime. Inside was exactly what you'd expect. 6 booths with cracked vinyl seats, a counter with 8 stools, linoleum floor that had been mopped so many times the pattern was mostly gone. Everything beige and brown and faded, the smell of old grease and industrial coffee. And behind the counter, a woman with silver hair pulled so tight against her skull, it looked painful. "You hear about the job?" she said before I could even close the door behind me. Christina Cruz. That's what she told me her name was when I asked. Owner and manager, 5'4" and thin like she'd been stretched too far. Pale gray eyes that seemed to look right through me, never quite focusing on my face. "Yeah," I said. "I saw the sign." "Experience?" I started to tell her about the restaurant in Portland, about the 2 years I'd spent waiting tables and working prep. But she held up a hand before I got halfway through. "You'll work nights, 11 to 7, 50 a shift plus tips and room upstairs. Start tonight." Just like that. No questions about references or why I looked like I'd been living rough. No concern about the fact that I probably smelled like bus station bathrooms and desperation. She reached under the counter and pulled out a laminated card, slid it across the formica toward me. "Rules," she said. 6 lines of text in faded blue ink, handwritten in careful block letters. I read them twice. What kind of rules are these? But when I looked up, Christina was already walking away. She disappeared through a door marked "Private" without another word, leaving me standing there with the laminated card in my hands and the sound of the air conditioner filling the silence. The laminated card felt cheap between my fingers. 6 rules printed in that faded blue ink you see on restaurant menus that have been around too long. Rule 1, never serve water without ice. Rule 2, keep the radio tuned to 1090 AM. Rule 3, lock the supply closet at exactly 11:47 PM. Rule 4, never acknowledge customers who enter through the emergency exit. Rule 5, count the stools before and after each hour. Rule 6, never enter the walk-in freezer alone. I'd seen this kind of bullshit before. Every diner from Phoenix to Portland had their little superstitions. Don't mop counterclockwise. Always brew the first pot with your back to the door. Keep a penny taped under the register. Restaurant folklore passed down from one desperate manager to the next. Like any of it mattered when you're slinging hash at 3 a.m. for truckers and insomniacs. 5 years bouncing between kitchens teaches you what's real and what's just people trying to feel like they got some control over chaos. Real was grease burns and walkout customers and health inspectors who showed up right when your dishwasher called in sick. Real was rent due and electric bills and the way your feet screamed after a double shift. Superstitions were just noise. I slipped the card into my back pocket and looked around the place again. Standard setup. 6 stools bolted to the floor in front of a counter that had seen better decades. 4 booth tables with red vinyl seats cracked enough to catch loose change. Coffee machine that hummed like it had emphysema. Grill surface that looked clean enough, though the edges showed years of buildup no amount of scrubbing would fix. The radio sat on a shelf behind the coffee station, already tuned to 1090. Static mixed with what sounded like talk radio. Volume low enough that I couldn't make out words. Good enough. 9:14 rolled around and the bell above the door chimed. My first customer. Big guy in a Peterbilt cap, the kind of trucker who'd been driving since before GPS made the job easier. 6'1", maybe 230, with that gut that comes from too many truck stop meals and not enough walking. His jacket was denim, stained with oil spots that probably had stories. Face looked like 40 years of highway wind and diesel fumes had carved lines into leather. "Coffee," he said, settling onto the middle stool. His voice carried that slow drawl you pick up somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon. "And whatever eggs you got back there." I grabbed the coffee pot and a white ceramic mug. Standard diner protocol, coffee first, questions later. The guy looked like he'd been driving all day, maybe all week. How you want those eggs? Over easy. Toast if you got it. I set the mug down and poured. Steam rose between us, carrying that burnt smell coffee gets when it sits too long on the burner. Toast we got. White or wheat? White's fine. I turned toward the grill and cracked 2 eggs onto the surface. They sizzled and popped in the thin layer of oil I'd spread across the metal. Behind me, I heard the trucker settling in. The squeak of vinyl, the soft clink of ceramic as he lifted his mug. That's when I noticed his shadow. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who pays attention to shadows. Most of the time, you don't even see them unless the light hits wrong. But this one caught my eye because it didn't make sense. The trucker sat facing the counter, facing me, but his shadow stretched across the floor toward the front window, like he was standing with his back to me instead of his front. Dark outline of shoulders and that cap, pointing the wrong direction entirely. I flipped the eggs and tried to shake it off. Fluorescent lights did weird things sometimes. Reflections bounced funny off windows and chrome surfaces. Had to be something like that. But when I glanced over my shoulder again, the shadow hadn't moved. Still pointing toward the window while Jorge, he'd told me his name when he ordered, sat clear as day facing the other direction. The eggs were done. I slid them onto a plate with 2 pieces of toast and walked back to the counter. Jorge smiled when I set the food down. That's when I saw his teeth, too many of them. Not like he had extras exactly, but like each tooth was just a little too wide, taking up more space than they should. His smile stretched further than faces were supposed to stretch. "You're new here," he said. Wasn't a question. "First night," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "How'd you know?" "You mentioned my shadow." The coffee pot felt heavy in my hand. I hadn't said anything about his shadow. Hadn't said a word about it. Jorge cut into his eggs with the side of his fork. Yolk ran across the plate like thick yellow paint. Most folks who work here learn not to mention things like that pretty quick. I should have walked away. Should have gone back to the grill and minded my own business. But $43 in my pocket and nowhere else to go meant I needed this job more than I needed answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. "Must be the lights," I said. Jorge nodded and took a bite. Must be. I refilled his coffee and tried to focus on normal things. Wiping down counters, checking the grill temperature, counting the stools like the card said, 6 before, 6 after. All present and accounted for. Jorge finished his eggs in silence. When he was done, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, quarters and dimes mostly, with a few nickels mixed in. He counted them onto the counter with thick fingers that moved too precise for someone his size. "That should cover it," he said. I scooped the coins into my palm. They felt wrong immediately. Not just warm, but hot. Like they'd been sitting on a radiator or in direct sunlight. Hot enough that I almost dropped them back onto the counter. Jorge stood and adjusted his cap. "You take care now," he said. "And remember what that card tells you. Rules exist for reasons." He walked to the door and pushed through into the parking lot. Bell chimed once and fell silent. Through the window, I watched him climb into the cab of a blue Peterbilt that I swear hadn't been there when I started my shift. The coins burned against my palm. I walked to the register and hit the key to open the cash drawer. The bills inside looked normal enough, worn 10s and 5s and a few 20s. I reached down to drop Jorge's payment into the coin compartments. Sand. Warm sand poured between my fingers and scattered across the cash drawer. Not coins anymore, just fine brown granules that felt like they'd come straight from a desert highway. I stared at the mess for a long time. Sand mixed with the real quarters and dimes that had been there when Christina showed me the register. No way to separate what was real from what used to be coins but wasn't anymore. The radio crackled with static. 10:90 a.m., just like the card said. I closed the drawer and tried not to think about shadows pointing the wrong direction or teeth that didn't fit right in human mouths. Tried not to think about the way Jorge had known I was new, or how he'd heard words I never spoke. But my hand still felt hot where the coins had been, and when I looked toward the front window, I could swear I saw the outline of a shadow that shouldn't have been there. 10:30 rolled around like clockwork. I'd been watching the old Coca-Cola clock above the grill, its red hands moving with that mechanical precision that makes time feel heavy when you're alone. The radio crackled. Not the usual static you get when a station's weak. This was different. Sharp little pops that made the speakers buzz like angry wasps. I looked over at the radio sitting on the shelf behind the register. Still tuned to 10:90 a.m., same as it had been all night. Then the voice started. A woman's voice, flat and emotionless like those automated phone systems that tell you your call is important. But colder. She was reading names, just names, one after another in that dead monotone that somehow made my teeth ache. Robert Chavez, Maria Santos, David Kim, Jennifer Walsh. I walked closer to the radio. The sound was coming through clear now, no static at all. Just that voice, methodical as a grocery list. Thomas Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, Michael Johnson, Dolly Hubbard. My hand froze halfway to the volume dial. James Peterson, Lisa Williams, Phoenix Hubbard. The floor felt unsteady beneath my boots. Those were my parents' names. Dolly and Phoenix Hubbard, clear as anything, mixed in with all those other names like they belonged there. Patricia Davis, Kevin Moore, Remy Hubbard, Angela Foster, Christopher Bell, Remy Hubbard, my name. Twice now. The voice kept going, that same dead cadence never changing. More names I didn't recognize, then another one that hit like ice water down my spine. Remy Hubbard. 3 times. My name 3 times in maybe 2 minutes of listening. I grabbed the radio, fingers slipping on the plastic casing. The voice was still going, reading names like a memorial service, but I couldn't hear anything past the blood rushing in my ears. Then static swallowed everything. The speakers popped once, twice, and went quiet. I stood there holding the radio, waiting for something else to happen. But the silence stretched out until I could hear my own breathing echoing off the empty walls. My hands were shaking when I set the radio back down. Had to be some kind of interference. Maybe a memorial broadcast from another station bleeding through. People die every day. Common names like mine and my parents probably show up on those lists all the time. But the way that voice had sounded, like it was reading from a prepared script, like those names meant something specific. I turned the dial away from 1090, then back again. Static filled the speakers for a few seconds before the signal cleared. Wind sounds. Not the electronic hiss of dead air, but actual wind, like someone had left a microphone outside during a storm. It rose and fell with the irregular rhythm of real weather, carrying fragments of something else underneath. Voices, maybe. Too distant to make out words, but the cadence felt familiar, rising and falling like prayer. Like the responsive readings we used to do at my grandmother's church when I was a kid, voices joining together and separating in patterns older than memory. I turned the volume up. The wind got louder, but those underneath voices stayed just out of reach. Every time I thought I could almost understand what they were saying, the wind would shift and carry the words away. 10:55 by the Coca-Cola clock, time to count stools. Stupid rule. But I'd already broken one tonight and didn't need Christina finding any more reasons to dock my pay. I started at the far end by the window. 1, 2, 3. Red vinyl seats, chrome legs, the kind of stools you see in diners across the country. 4, 5, 6. Some of the vinyl was cracked, showing yellow foam underneath. 7, 8, 9. The one near the register had a cigarette burn on the edge. 10, 11, 12 stools. same as when I'd counted them during my first shift. 15 minutes later, I counted again. 13. I stood there staring at the counter, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The extra stool sat at the far end, past where the 12 had been before. Same red vinyl, same chrome legs, but the seat looked wrong. Darker than the others, with a wet sheen like someone had just wiped it down. But nobody had been in the diner since that weird woman with the coins. I walked closer, my boots loud against the tile floor. The stool looked normal from a distance, but up close I could see the vinyl was actually damp. Not with water. This had an oily quality that made my stomach turn. When I got within arm's reach, I heard it. Breathing. Slow, patient breaths, like someone sitting right there on the stool. In and out. Steady as a metronome. But the stool was empty. Just that damp red vinyl reflecting the overhead lights. I reached out to touch the seat and the breathing stopped. My hand hung in the air for maybe 10 seconds before I pulled it back. The silence felt heavier than the breathing had, like something was holding its breath and waiting to see what I'd do next. 11:47. Time to lock the supply closet. Rule 3 on Christina's little card, and the only one I hadn't tested yet. The closet sat behind the grill, just a plain wooden door with a simple deadbolt. I'd looked inside during my first shift. Cleaning supplies, extra napkins, boxes of coffee filters. Nothing special. I turned the key and heard the bolt slide home with a solid click. Immediately, something started scratching on the other side of the door. Not frantic clawing like an animal trying to get out. This was methodical, rhythmic, like fingernails tapping against wood in a deliberate pattern. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I pressed my ear against the door. The scratching was coming from about chest height, right where someone standing inside might reach up to knock, but there was nobody in there. I'd locked it myself, and there was no other way in or out. The pattern kept repeating. 3 scratches, 2 scratches, 3 scratches. Like Morse code. Or maybe like someone trying to spell something out. Like someone trying to send a message. I pressed my ear against the supply closet door. The metal felt cold against my skin, that industrial chill you get from steel that never sees sunlight. The scratching had stopped, but there was something else now. A voice. Whisper thin, like air leaking from a punctured tire. My voice. She lied to you. The words came from behind the door, spoken in my own flat Pacific Northwest drawl. Christina lied about everything. My hand jerked back from the door like I'd touched a live wire, but I couldn't step away. Couldn't move at all. The rules aren't protection. My voice continued from inside the closet. They're feeding instructions. Every time you follow one, you're serving it another meal. The blood in my veins turned to slush. I'd been following those rules like gospel. Never serve water without ice. Keep the radio tuned to 10:90 a.m. Lock the supply closet at exactly 11:45. I'd been feeding something, all night long. Rule 1, my voice whispered. Ice makes the water colder. Cold water sinks faster, reaches deeper places. A pause, then a sound like dry leaves scraping concrete. Rule 2, that frequency. It's not music, is it? It's a dinner bell. My throat closed up tight. I tried to swallow and couldn't. Rule 3, lock the closet. Keep the appetite contained until morning, until it's hungry enough to really feast. I stumbled backward, my boots catching on the rubber mat behind the counter. The sound of my own voice explaining how I'd been played, how I'd been turned into some kind of waiter for whatever lived in this place. It made my stomach twist into knots. That's when I hit something solid. Not the counter, not the wall. A person. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. A young woman stood maybe 2 feet behind me, close enough that I should have heard her breathing. Should have felt her body heat, should have known she was there. But she'd appeared like smoke. She was maybe 24, 25. Auburn hair falling past her shoulders in waves that caught the fluorescent light. Pale skin like she'd never seen sun, and green eyes that stared without blinking. She wore a yellow sundress that belonged at a summer picnic, not in a desert diner at midnight. Jesus, I breathed. Where did you... My eyes flicked toward the front door, still closed, still locked from the inside with that deadbolt I'd turned myself. But the emergency exit behind the 13th stool, the one that led to the back parking lot, hung open just a crack. Night air leaked through the gap, carrying the smell of sage and cooling asphalt. She'd come through the back. While I was listening to my own voice explain how screwed I was, Rule 4 slammed into my head like a brick. Customers who enter through the emergency exit should be ignored completely. Do not acknowledge their presence. Do not serve them. Do not speak to them under any circumstances. The rule wanted me to turn around. Pretend she wasn't there. Keep following instructions like a good little puppet. But my voice from behind the closet door had just told me the rules were feeding instructions. The woman tilted her head slightly. No expression on her face. Just those unblinking green eyes studying me like I was something interesting under a microscope. You heard it too, she said. Her voice was soft, almost ethereal, like she was speaking from underwater. I opened my mouth to deny it, but she moved faster than seemed possible. Her hand shot out and wrapped around my wrist. Cold. Not just cold. Freezer burn cold. The kind of cold that bites through skin and settles in your bones. I tried to pull away, but her fingers held like steel cables. The diner's hungry, she whispered. It's always hungry. And the rules you've been following, they're not keeping you safe. They're seasoning you. My free hand went numb. The cold was spreading up my arm like poison. The last 3 workers who came through here, she continued, they followed every rule perfectly, never missed a beat, never questioned anything. Her grip tightened. Want to know where they are now? I didn't want to know, but she told me anyway. Digested. The word hit me like a sledgehammer. I thought about Jorge, the customer I'd served earlier, how he'd known exactly what to order, how he'd left exact change, how he'd walked out into a parking lot that should have been empty but somehow felt occupied, how he'd felt wrong from the moment he walked in. You can break the cycle, Nicole whispered, but you have to stop feeding it. You have to starve it. Her fingers released my wrist and I stumbled backward, cradling my arm against my chest. The skin where she'd touched me felt raw like frostbite. But her words made sense. Terrible, awful sense. If the rules were feeding instructions, then breaking them might cut off the food supply, might starve whatever lived in this place. I looked at the radio first. 10:90 a.m., just like the rules demanded. The frequency that was supposedly music but sounded more like a dinner bell when you really listened. I grabbed the dial and yanked it hard to the right. Static exploded from the speakers. Then silence. Then a different station entirely. Some late-night talk show host discussing UFO sightings in Nevada. Normal. Human. Real. The change in the air was immediate, like pressure dropping before a storm. Next was Rule 1. Never serve water without ice. I grabbed a glass from behind the counter, filled it with lukewarm tap water, and set it down on the counter in front of an empty stool. No ice. Just room temperature water that wouldn't sink to any deeper places. The fluorescent lights flickered once, twice. Then I turned to the supply closet. Rule 3. Lock it at exactly 11:45. It was already past midnight. I walked to the closet and turned the handle. The lock clicked open with a sound like breaking bones. The scratching stopped. Just like that. Complete silence from inside the closet. But from behind me, from the direction of the 13th stool, the breathing changed. The slow, steady rhythm I'd been hearing all night turned ragged, labored. like something was starving, like something was starting to wheeze. Her fingers clamped down on my wrist like a vice, not the desperate grip of someone trying to get my attention. This was something else, something that made the bones in my forearm creak. "You don't get it?" Nicole whispered, her green eyes wide and unblinking in that fluorescent light. "You think breaking the rules just gets you in trouble, like detention or getting fired?" I tried to pull away. Her grip tightened. "But you're not just another customer now. You're not even an appetizer anymore." Her voice had that ethereal quality again, like she was speaking through water. "You broke the rules, Remy. That makes you the main course." The diner felt different suddenly, smaller. The air conditioning unit that had been humming all night went quiet, leaving nothing but the sound of our breathing and that radio static crackling from the speakers. Then I heard it, a wet sound, like something dripping. I looked up at the ceiling tiles. Dark stains were spreading across them, seeping through the cheap acoustic panels. Not water, something thicker, something that caught the light wrong. The walls started next, same dark substance oozing from the corners where the paint met the metal fixtures. It moved too slow to be blood, too dark to be anything natural. The smell hit me then, copper and rot and something else I couldn't name. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. Nicole's grip loosened just enough for me to feel circulation return to my fingers. "He's not here," she said. "He never was." The floor beneath my boots felt wrong. I looked down and watched the linoleum tiles ripple like water disturbed by a dropped stone. The black and white checkerboard pattern warped and twisted, each square becoming something fluid and alive. My left foot sank half an inch into what should have been solid flooring. That's when I remembered Rule 6, the last one on that laminated card. If something goes wrong, get to the walk-in freezer and don't come out until sunrise. I'd thought it was about hiding from robberies or tornadoes. Now I understood it was about hiding from whatever this place became after midnight. "Come on." I grabbed Nicole's arm, feeling how cold her skin was through the thin fabric of that yellow sundress. "We're getting out of here." She didn't resist when I pulled her toward the kitchen. Her feet moved, but there was something mechanical about it, like she was sleepwalking. The tiles beneath us kept rippling with each step, sending waves across the floor that made my stomach lurch. The kitchen felt like stepping into a furnace. The grill was cold, had been all night, but heat radiated from the walls themselves. The metal surfaces were slick with that dark substance, and the smell was stronger here, rot and copper and something that reminded me of burnt hair. The freezer door stood open. Same heavy steel door with the industrial handle, but the light inside was wrong. Too bright, too white, like staring into fresh snow on a sunny day. I pulled Nicole through the doorway and slammed it shut behind us. The cold hit like a physical blow. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the sweat on my forehead turned to ice crystals. But it wasn't just the temperature, it was the silence. Complete and total. Like the world outside had stopped existing. I turned around, expecting to see shelves of frozen food, maybe some hanging meat, the usual industrial freezer setup. Instead, I found myself staring at a wooden door. Not just any wooden door. This thing was old, ancient maybe. Heavy oak planks bound with iron straps that had gone black with age. The wood itself was dark and worn smooth, like countless hands had touched it over the years. But it was the names that made my blood freeze. They were carved into every inch of the door's surface. Some fresh, the wood still pale where the blade had cut. Others so old they'd darkened with time until they were barely visible. Names scratched in desperate handwriting. Some I recognized. American names like Jennifer and Michael and David. Others looked foreign, symbols and letters from alphabets I'd never seen. And there, near the bottom, carved in fresh wood that still smelled of sawdust, Nicole Richmond. I turned to look at her. She was staring at the door with those wide green eyes. But something was happening to her. Her edges kept blurring, like heat shimmer on summer asphalt. One second she was solid, real as anyone. The next, she was translucent, barely there. "I was the night worker before you," she said, her voice echoing in the small space. 3 months ago. I thought I was so smart, thought I'd figured out a way around the rules. Her form solidified for a moment, then flickered again. But there's no way around. There's only through, and someone always has to stay. She looked at me then, and I could see right through her to the carved names on the door behind. I've been trapped here, Remy, stuck between what I was and what this place wants me to become. The mechanism clicked into place in my head like tumblers in a lock, the breathing from the 13th stool, the scratching in the supply closet, the coins that burned my hand, and the voice on the radio that sounded like mine. This wasn't just a job, it was a trap, and Nicole had been the bait. "You need someone to take your place," I said. She nodded, her form flickering faster now. "I'm sorry. I tried to warn you, but I couldn't. It wouldn't let me say it outright. The rules are absolute here." I understood then. Every warning had been wrapped in riddles because she literally couldn't tell me the truth directly. The place, whatever this place really was, wouldn't allow it. But I had a choice to make. Stand here and let her manipulate me into walking through that door, or... "I'm sorry too," I said. Then I grabbed her shoulders and shoved her toward the ancient wooden door. Her eyes went wide with shock and something else. Relief, maybe, or terror. Hard to tell when someone's face is flickering in and out of existence. The door swung open without resistance, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Not the absence of light. Actual darkness, thick and tangible like black velvet. Nicole's form solidified one last time as she stumbled toward the threshold. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she was through, and I slammed the door shut behind her with both hands. The impact echoed through the freezer like a gunshot. The iron straps glowed red for just a moment, then faded back to black. And in the sudden silence that followed, I heard the soft sound of wood being carved. When I looked at the door again, there was a new name near the bottom, the wood still pale and fresh. Remy Hubbard. The walk-in freezer door swung shut behind me with that soft, pneumatic hiss, and I stood there in the diner's main space, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the light. Only something was different. The fluorescent tubes overhead weren't buzzing with that electrical hum I'd gotten used to. They cast a steady, clean glow across surfaces that looked newer somehow. The vinyl on the stools showed no cracks, no worn spots where countless asses had planted themselves over the decades. The chrome on the coffee maker gleamed without a single fingerprint smudge. Dawn light streamed through the front windows, and I blinked hard because those windows were crystal clear. Not a water spot or streak of grease anywhere. Like someone had spent hours with newspaper and Windex, getting every surface to sparkle. I took a step forward, my work boots silent on linoleum that didn't creak or buckle under my weight. The whole place felt suspended, like I'd walked into a photograph instead of the run-down diner I'd been working in all night. My hands were shaking. Had been shaking since I'd dragged Nicole into that freezer, since I'd watched her disappear into nothing but cold air and the smell of old meat. I flexed my fingers, trying to get the blood flowing again. That's when I caught sight of myself in the coffee maker's chrome surface. The face looking back wasn't mine. I mean, it was. Same dark hair, same angular jawline, same brown eyes. But everything had shifted. The cheekbones stood out sharper, like someone had carved away the soft tissue underneath. My eyes had sunk deeper into their sockets, surrounded by shadows that looked permanent, etched there by something heavier than just lack of sleep. I looked older, not by years, but by something else. Like I'd been hollowed out from the inside, all the essential parts scraped away and replaced with empty space. My reflection moved when I moved, but there was a delay. Just a split second, like an old TV with bad reception. I raised my hand to touch my face, and the reflection followed a beat behind. I jerked my hand away from the chrome. My reflection kept moving for another half second, fingers still reaching toward its face before it caught up and stopped. The silence in the diner pressed against my eardrums. No radio static, no electrical hum, no distant traffic from the highway. Just the kind of quiet you get in places where sound goes to die. I needed to get out. Whatever had happened here, whatever I'd stumbled into, I needed to put distance between myself and this place before it got worse. The front door was maybe 20 feet away. Glass and aluminum frame, the kind of commercial entrance you see in every roadside business from here to Oregon. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just a door. I walked toward it, my boots still making no sound on the pristine linoleum. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. The air itself seemed thicker, like walking through invisible molasses. My hand closed around the door handle. Metal, cool to the touch, solid enough. I turned it. Nothing. I pulled harder, putting my shoulder into it. The handle turned freely in both directions, but the door itself didn't budge. Not locked. Something else. Like it was painted in place. Just part of the wall, pretending to be functional. I pressed my face against the glass, looking out at the parking lot. My rental car sat right where I'd left it, but the asphalt around it looked different. Newer. The cracks and oil stains that had been there when I'd walked in were gone, replaced by smooth black surface that reflected the morning light like water. Behind me, I heard the soft rustle of paper. I turned around. The window next to the door, the one that had been empty except for faded decals advertising Coca-Cola and daily specials, now held a sign. White poster board with red letters, the kind you'd make with a Sharpie and a ruler. Help wanted night shift apply within. The letters were still wet. I could see the ink glistening under the fluorescent lights, little spots where the marker had pooled and darkened. I hadn't seen anyone put it there. I'd been facing the window the whole time, fighting with the door handle, and there had been nothing but glass and empty space. My breath fogged the window as I stared at the sign. The letters seemed to pulse, like they were alive, like they were breathing with their own rhythm. That's when it hit me. I hadn't escaped anything. The freezer, Nicole, the voice coming from the supply closet, none of it had ended. I'd just moved from one part of the machine to another, changed positions, like a gear shifting to a new slot in the mechanism. The diner wasn't just a place, it was something else, something that fed on people like me, desperate enough to take any job, grateful enough not to ask questions. We came in through the front door, and we never left. We just changed, became part of whatever kept this place running. Nicole had tried to warn me. In the freezer, before she'd dissolved into nothing, she'd said I didn't understand, that breaking the rules wouldn't save me. She'd been right. I was the diner now. Part of its hunger, part of its need. I'd stand behind that counter, serve coffee and eggs to travelers who stopped for a quick meal, and wait for the next soul desperate enough to answer the help wanted sign, the next person who'd think they were getting a lucky break, a chance to earn enough money to get back on their feet, the next person who'd ignore the warnings because they needed the work too badly to care about anything else. My legs carried me back toward the counter without any conscious decision on my part. The movement felt automatic, like following a script I'd already memorized. The door marked private sat at the far end of the counter, same as it always had, but when I walked over and turned the handle, it opened onto nothing. Not a room, not a hallway, just empty space that stretched into darkness. No walls, no floor, no ceiling, just void. Christina had known. She'd always known. The door didn't lead anywhere because it didn't need to. It was just another part of the illusion, Another piece of the machine designed to keep people from asking the right questions. I closed the door and turned around. The diner stretched out in front of me, clean and perfect and hungry, waiting for the next customer to walk through the front entrance, the next person who'd sit at the counter and order coffee while I stood behind the register, taking their money and pretending everything was normal. My hands found the coffee pot without thinking, muscle memory from a single night of work, already carved into my bones like I'd been doing this for years. Outside, I could see headlights approaching on the highway. Someone else driving through the desert, looking for a place to stop and rest. I straightened my shoulders and waited for them to find us.